The message today is from 1 Samuel chapter 19, and it's about power, ambition, and integrity. Power, ambition, and integrity. And as we get into this thing, all of us deal with power, and all of us deal with ambition. I worked with a pastor once who was promised a job a few years out, and he began to covet the job before it was given to him. It's like he's trying to take something that's being offered, but he doesn't have the patience to wait until somebody gives it to him. And it didn't turn out well. That's grasping for power. You know, we've all heard the old saw that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, that's true. And we're going to read about that a little bit in the Bible today. And I'm going to do it a little different than I normally do. Normally, I'm going to kind of go verse by verse by verse and talk about it. Today, I'm going to do like 10 verses at a time and then talk about them for a little bit. And I want to front load this with some illustrations. I just want to talk to you and tell you some stories. One's funny and one's real, but about how that we should view power. And when I say power, I would be talking to myself. I would be talking to Pastor C. I would be talking to the guys that oversee the lower lobby and have other people serving them. But I would be talking to you if you work at the airline and people come to you with a need, like I did yesterday at a counter in Los Angeles, and you act like a jerk, or you could choose to act like a nice person. You know, are you sucking up power, or are you serving people with power? There's a vast difference. And so as we get into this message this morning, I want you to be thinking about who you are, what you do, why you come to church. I mean, is it really what he's saying in the last song, that it's all about you, Lord, it's all about you. It's about Jesus. Jesus be the Lord of your church. Is it really about that? Or is it about you coming to hear some sermon that makes you feel really good about yourself? The sermon should do that. But if that's all it's doing, then we ought to probably stay home and watch TV. Because this is really about motivating an army to go out. The Bible says in Ephesians chapter 4 that we come together so guys like me, apostles, pastors, teachers, evangelists, are there to equip the saints. That's you, to do the work of ministry. And the work of ministry is Operation Shoebox. It's loving on people down in the lobby. There's a pastor from out of town that I was talking to today that I met on one of my trips, and he goes, I'm so impressed with what goes on down here. There's so much love. Everybody's nice. Everybody smiles. Nobody's on a power trip. But how do you treat the guy that mows your lawn? How do you treat the person at the bank where you work who comes in because they're desperate and they need a loan? How do you treat the gray areas where you could say, okay, I'm going to be nice to this person, or you could, I travel a lot, so I got to tell you a story. I was on my vacation again. I was in France. And you know the French people, that one of their national pastimes is to have strikes. And so I'm in France, I'm in Nice, and I got to leave from Paris to come home, and they go on strike. The railroad goes on strike. And so my friends took a chance, because they had to keep the trains running for the first few minutes in the morning, and then that train would run wherever it had to go, but you had to get up at 5 to get the train. And I thought, if I don't get on that train, I don't know what I'm doing. So I had to fly from Nice to Paris, and then I was able to get the train, into the airport in the morning. And I get there, and as I'm getting there, wise, wonderful person that I am, I've confused the time the plane's going to land in Houston for the time that it's going to take off from Paris. And so I walk into the airport all bright and early, and I always do that. I'm ahead of schedule, and they're calling last call for my flight. So it's like 2-3 weeks after United and Continental merged. So I think they're merged, right? So I go to the Continental lady and I tell her what I did. And she starts looking at her screen, and she goes, okay, we can get you back on the flight in Houston, and the rest of your itinerary will work, but it's going to be $1,600 a person to get from here to Houston. Because I did something stupid. And she's not liking doing that. She's nice. She says, we're not really merged yet. Go to United. They'll treat you better. So I go to United, and there's this nice lady there, and she says, what can I do for you, sir? And this little thing goes off inside of my head that I've learned is the voice of the Lord. It says, don't talk to her, talk to that lady. So I go to this lady, and I hand her my passport, and I hand her my ticket and the whole thing, and she looks at my passport, and she goes, Mr. Moore, you travel often. You should not make mistakes like this. Let me see what I can do. So she gets on the computer, and she goes, oh my. Oh my. I'm not going to charge you that. And she lets me go for free. And I think she's looking at the same that's $3,200 for two people. Just one leg of the flight. And bada bing. Okay. If you're into power, and somebody puts a uniform on you, then you learn to lord it over people. That happened to me yesterday at LAX twice. But if you're not into power, you can be into power. See, that lady in Paris, she was into power, but she was into serving people with power. It was a gray area. She could charge or not charge. She could have said, you stupid, it's going to cost you, boom. Or she could have said, I'm not going to do that. So power of itself is neutral. Power, when we let it corrupt our soul, is corrupting. You with me? Yeah. So I was going to tell you this. I got to tell it to you. There's an attorney. He's a New York attorney. He's got a lot of money, and he's a litigator. He sues people. And he goes down to Alabama, or maybe it was Georgia where Charlie's from, and he's out there, and he's on this farm, and they're shooting ducks. And he actually shoots a duck, and the thing lands across the fence in another farmer's field. And so he just does the logical thing. It's his duck. He shot it. He crawls over the fence, and he's there to get the duck. And this old coot comes up on this tractor, or one of those little three-wheel deals you drive around, and he got a shotgun too. And he points a shotgun at the attorney and goes, what are you doing on my land? The guy goes, I just came to get my duck. He goes, it's my duck. It's my land. It's my duck. And the attorney goes, no, it's my duck. I shot it. It's my duck. And the guy goes, no, it's my land. It's my duck. And the attorney goes, you don't know who you're dealing with. I will own your farm over this duck. He's going to sue him, right? Power. And so they go back and forth a little bit, and the old guy says, you know, we have a way of solving things down here, and it's called the 3-kick rule. And the guy goes, what's that? And he goes, I get to kick you 3 times because you're on my land, and then you get to kick me 3 times, and then I kick you 3 times, and you kick me 3 times, and whoever gives up loses the argument. So whoever gives up loses the duck, and whoever stays in the game keeps the duck. You with me? It's complicated. There's math involved. 3 kicks, 3 kicks, 3 kicks, 3 kicks. So you get over there, and the old guy's like 80 years old. The attorney's in his 50s, and he's thinking, what can this guy do? You know. So he gets all ready to go. The guy gets down off his little 3-wheel thing and kicks the guy right in the crotch. And he's just, like this. And then he kicks him in the gut. 3 kicks, right? And now he's down on his hands and knees. And then he kicks him in the butt, and he's face down in what they have in cow pastures. And he gets up, and he's wiping his face off and doing whatever, and he goes, okay, now it's my turn. And the guy goes, no, I give up. You can keep the duck. Don't let power go to your head. Now, I'm just back from vacation, right? So I'm going to talk for a while. You all can forgive me. So, I was on vacation, and I read a lot on vacation, and I have it's a free Kindle book if you want it. It's a free book called The Power of Words by Winston Churchill. And it's actually, some guy compiled a bunch of stuff from some of the speeches that he made, some of the things he wrote about the war, after the war. And by the way, if you haven't seen the film Dunkirk, which I haven't, I'm going to this week, everything I'm hearing is historically accurate. We would not be speaking English today if they hadn't rescued 220,000 men off the beaches of France so they could go back and fight to Germany. You need to see that movie. But you need to understand that the world that we live in is shaped by World War II. You need to understand that there were written plans discovered after the war. Because when Hitler rolled over Europe, the war didn't start in 1941. The war actually kind of started in 1937, but got serious in 1939 when Hitler started taking over different countries in Europe. By the end of 1939, early 1940, all that stood against Adolf Hitler and ultimately world domination were two countries, because we were out of it. We weren't even in it, were Russia and England. And he made a pact with Stalin, so they're buds, and they split up Poland. And so all that's left now is England. And so in the early 1940s, they start bombing London. And they killed 8,000 people, and they wounded like 40,000 more. And there's this guy who's out, the voice crying in the wilderness. He had been the undersecretary of the Navy, born to privilege, born in a palace called Blenheim Palace, named Winston Churchill. And he's kind of an arrogant person. Actually, as a little kid in school, he got in trouble once for telling another kid, when I am grown, I shall be a great man, and you shall be nothing. But he's learned some lessons. In World War I, as Undersecretary of the Navy, he made a stupid decision that got a lot of people killed. And it put him from being, what do they call it, a member of Parliament, which is like the Senate, to being out trying to write books to make a living. And that's what he did for years. And he was mocked by the English people. And then as Hitler began to grow in power, before the war started, the Nazis are coming up in power. Churchill starts going, this guy is he's our problem. He's going to dominate the world. He's going to go to war. He's going to do this. And the British public did their best to plug their ears and not listen to any of it. And in America, you have a man named Charles A. Lindbergh. You ever heard of him? Who's pro-Nazi. You never knew that. And he is leading this anti-war movement, which is keeping America out of the war. And by the way, because we had achieved peace at the end of World War I, the war to end all wars, the whole United States military, we didn't have an Air Force then, we had Marines and Navy and Army. The whole military of the United States of America was 160,000 people. Think about that, 160,000 people. That's like 1/10 of the people that live in Hawaii. It's nothing. And so we're asleep. The British people are asleep. They don't want to go to war. They don't want to aggravate Hitler. You have a prime minister named Neville Chamberlain who goes and gives away Czechoslovakia to Hitler, and all of a sudden Hitler has gone back on his word and is bombing England. And so they decide, we got to do something. We got to get rid of Chamberlain, and we need somebody that can run this country, that can win this war. Because all of Europe now, Southern Europe, Greece, everything, all of Europe is under Nazi control, except for the Soviet Union, or not the Soviet Union, it was just called Russia then, and England. And now they're raining bombs on England. And somehow, miraculously, the British fight them off in the air. And so it's kind of come to a stalemate. And so they fire Chamberlain, and they hire this guy, Winston Churchill, and the statement is in history, we need the most arrogant man in the British Empire to lead war against the most arrogant man in Europe, and that's how they got Winston Churchill. And so he's called to meet with the king, and he's told by the king that the Parliament has decided that you are going to be the prime minister. I mean, just one day he's not, and one day he is. And one of the cool things about Churchill is the man who seemed to hate him the most and try to put him down the most was named Neville Chamberlain. And Churchill had 3 days to form a cabinet. You know how long it took Donald Trump or Barack Obama to form a cabinet? It takes a couple months at least. 3 days. The first guy that Churchill picked to be on his team was Neville Chamberlain. Churchill was not in love with power. You with me so far? I'm giving you a lot of the sermon by giving you these illustrations, and then we're going to look at Saul and how Saul messed up because he was into power. And we're going to look at Peter and how Peter understood power and used it for the sake of the Lord, and we're going to go from there. And so here's what Churchill wrote about this coming to power, and it's important that you hear this. It says, "Thus then, on the night of 10th of May, at the outset of this mighty battle, I acquired the chief power in the state." In other words, I am the man, "which henceforth I wielded in ever-growing measure," which means I acquired more power for 5 years and 3 months of world war. We were only in the war for 3 years. They were in it for 5 years and 3 months. "At the end of which time, all of our enemies having surrendered unconditionally, I was immediately dismissed by the British electorate from all further conduct of their affairs." I was given ultimate power. I got more of it. I used it. I did my job, and they voted me out of office. And that's okay with me, because that's a democracy. 5-6 years later, they voted him back in. He became prime minister again. But during that time, he's got a grasp of power. He understands power. You serve people with power, and then you let go of power. And he gets it. And then here's the last part I want to read. It says, "During these last crowded days of the political crisis, my pulse had not quickened at any moment. I took it all as it came." In other words, when I wasn't in power and when they put me in power, it didn't make my heart beat faster. It was just what came my way. And he says this, "But I cannot conceal from the reader of this truthful account that as I went to bed at 3 a.m. on May the 11th, just after he was appointed the night before, get this, I was conscious of a profound sense of relief." Now, why would you be relieved? Because they just made you the prime minister. And here's what he says. "At last I had the authority to give directions over the whole scene," which would sound like somebody on a power trip. And he ends it with this, "I felt as if I were walking with destiny, and that all my past life had been but a preparation for this hour and for this trial." I was set up by God to do this. I understood power. I took power. I got more power. I did the job with power, and I let go of power. That's the kind of leader that you want to be. Am I making sense? Now, I want to bring this down to us a little bit, and this it's a weird one today because we're not going verse at a time and all that. But I want you to think about our church and where we're at right now, and I want to start with me. I've been pastoring people since 1965. In 1965, I was pastoring a bunch of kids, did it for 7 years. 1971, started a church, did that for 12 years. It grew to a couple thousand people. We planted 30 churches from that. 1983, I moved here. I was a pastor for 29 years. when I moved here, I felt like the Lord spoke to me because the vision that we had when we came to Hawaii, vision I had in California when I started out was build a big church, which to me meant like 200 people. The vision I had when I came here, the church had already grown to 2,000. I was the 30th guy to leave that church to go start a church. We came here going, we're going to start 100 churches of 100 people. That was our way of saying we're going to reach 1% of the state. We actually started like 53 churches, and we reached more than 1% of the state. And so as I came here, the Lord spoke to me and said, you need to look at California and what went on there as school. I was preparing you for what you're going to do in Hawaii. So I can say with Churchill, all my life I was prepared to do this, and I did it for 29 years. Well, and then 4 years ago, we came over here and we started. And you need to understand that from my perspective, this is a church in its infancy. You ain't seen nothing yet. We're just getting going. When you're only 4 years old as a congregation, we've done a lot of stuff. We've started 7 or 8 churches. We've done. That's just getting going. And the best is yet to come. And I can say this, I'm getting ready when I move, and by the way, I'm still coming back to haunt you, so don't, get all weepy-eyed and all that, but I'll be back. But I'm moving on to where I'm going to work with this group I'm the voice in the wilderness. Everybody wants to build a church, a monster church. We've got all these, about them, these monster churches in America. One of them in Houston, Texas, 40,000 people. But you take all the monster churches in America, and 6% of the Christians attend them. The real deal is little churches where people love each other, and they go and start more little churches, and they love each other. And if we can do that, we can change the culture. And so I found this group that believes what I believe, and on top of that, they give away everything for free. They got somebody writing grants, and so there's 2,200 videos and books I'm writing my third one for them right now, and they just give it away for free. And I'm going to go do that for the rest of my life. So at age 72, I'm still having a voice that can change the world. For this, I was created. All the good things that we've done are good, and they're valid, and they were the thing for the moment, but I'm set up for this. On the other hand, Pastor C is just a young puppy. The guy is like, how old? 58. 58. Kid. And he's been a missionary for 17 years in Japan. He's traveled forever, because while he was a missionary in Japan, he was doing this in countries that I can't even say the name of. Well, it'll go out on the internet. He's influencing people in places you'd never heard of. And he's doing the same thing that we've done, and he's done it in a different place, in a different way. And when I say the best is yet to come, I'm thinking this. God blessed us with the right guy to get into our future. And then I start to do it with power. Because when we started looking for a pastor, I had this list I carry around my phone, a checklist of they need to fit all these boxes. And I had another list of all the people who I've discipled who could possibly do that. But the only one who could get near the list, the only one I could check off half the 13 or 14 things that I had, you could check off all of them. So we're down to there's only one candidate to be our pastor, and it's Pastor C. So it was kind of like it wasn't even in our hands. It was the decision was made. And so we get this person. The one question that I had, though, and I never have told him this, is I knew him when he was young and he was malleable. And then I knew him in Japan and he was struggling. And so our relationship is I'm there to encourage and whatever and whatever. And then I know him because for the last few years, he's lived in Honolulu. I only see him in Mongolia or Japan or Los Angeles. I never see him here. And so it's like the one issue is the power thing. How's he handle power? And so I've been watching. And he does really, really good with it. Really, really good with it. And I want you to know that. But I want you to also think this. Why do you come here? Do you come here as a Bless Me Club? Or do you come here to be a part of a team of people that are out to make a difference in the world? And it really comes down to this. At last, I had the authority to give directions over the whole scene. I felt as if I were walking with destiny, and that all my past life had been but a preparation for this hour and this trial. What did God make you for? And what are you going to do with it? Now, we're going to talk about power, because power comes into it. Power to say no to God, power to say yes to God, power to go, I'm the boss here, or power to go, I'm here to serve you. How do I do this? How do you do it in church? How do you do it in the extension ministries of our church, the things that we do out there in the world? But also, how do you treat the guy that mows your lawn? How do you treat the person when you go to the bank and that you work in, and somebody comes in for a loan? How do you treat those children in that classroom that you teach every day? If you're a doctor, how do you treat your staff? Power. We could be godly or we could be stupid. It's up to us. So you've heard a long sermon, now you're going to get a little scripture. In 1 Samuel chapter 19, first 10 verses, we see Saul, who started out very well, chosen by God, and instantly has victories. And then he starts to get a little shaky, flaky. Goliath comes on the scene. We talked about that before. And Saul's trembling in his boots. Goliath's saying, send your biggest guy, and I'm the biggest guy, and we'll just do it on the battlefield, and whoever wins the war. Just two of us. And Saul's the biggest guy in Israel, and he's in his tent shaking. And this young punk named David comes on the scene, and he's just there to bring cheese to his brothers. And he hears about the thing and says, that idiot's defying the armies of the living God. Somebody needs to deal with him. And David goes out and gives the guy a lesson in ballistics, uses his sling, and Saul is dead, or Goliath's dead at the end of the day. And people start singing about David. David killed one man. And these women, it's like a folk song. Saul has slain his thousands, and he had. And David had slain his tens of thousands. And he'd only killed one guy. And so it's just poetic, it's nutty, it's romantic. They were probably all in love with him, right? But it gets to Saul. He can't handle it. He's jealous. He's covetous of his job. God has already told him, because you messed up and defied me, you're going to be out, and somebody else is going to be in. And Saul's figured out that it's going to be David that God's going to put in, and Saul's going to kill David. And so this is where we get in the text, and I've talked long, so we're not going to read the whole chapter, but read this. It says, Saul spoke to Jonathan his son, who is David's buddy by now, and to all of his servants, that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, Saul my father seeks to kill you. Therefore be on your guard in the morning, because like tomorrow he wants to kill you. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. And I'll go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, where he's looking for you. And I will speak to my father about you, and if I learn anything, I'll tell you. So Jonathan went out, and it says he spoke well of David to Saul his father, and he said to him, let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, because his deeds have brought good to you. Everything David did, he did to serve Saul. He was humble, he did it to serve Saul, and it worked. But Saul was covetous, he was jealous, and he was evil, and he couldn't stand David's success. It was the thing David did to serve Saul was a threat to Saul. And so he wants to kill him. And it says, Jonathan spoke well of David to his father and said, "Let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his deeds have brought good to you. For he took his life in his hand," and that's what he did when he went up a guy that's like 8 feet tall, when he struck down the Philistine. "And the Lord worked a great salvation for all of Israel. You saw it, and you rejoiced." In other words, when David killed Goliath, Saul's hooting and hollering in his tent. He's up there partying with everybody else. And it says, "Why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without a cause?" People will do incredibly stupid, even self-destructive things when pride and jealousy and ambition get into their heart. Power corrupts people if you let it. Power enhances people if you stay humble. And so Saul listened to his voice of Jonathan, and he swore, "As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death." So Saul turns around, repents, makes a right decision. So Jonathan called David. Jonathan reported to him all these things, and Jonathan brought David back to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. Now David is married to Saul's daughter, and so he's living in the palace. And it says there was war again, verse 8, and David went out and fought the Philistines. Notice it doesn't say that Saul went out and fought the Philistines and David went with him. David now is running the show in terms of the armies. He goes out and fights the Philistines. It says he struck them with a great blow, so they fled before him. And then watch this. A harmful spirit from the Lord. And I don't have time to go into it. Pastor C went into it in depth. If you have a paper Bible, and if you would just strike out the words "from the Lord," you'd kind of get the picture of what's going on. It's a demonic spirit, and because people understood spiritual things in weird ways, they made it read like this. It's just a demon. A demon came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand, and David was playing the lyre. David originally had been brought into Saul's house to play the guitar, basically, to soothe Saul whenever he went a little nuts. And so David's sitting there playing his guitar, and verse 10 says, Saul sought to pin David to the wall with a spear, but he eluded, so that he struck the spear into the wall, and David fled and escaped into the night. Saul's trying to run a spear through David's body. It gets into the wall and it sticks there, so he threw it hard. But David escaped, and he gets off into the night. David escapes. His wife covers for him. Her father threatens her over that. And then the thing goes on. I'm not going to read it. It says that he went out to a place called Ramah, where Samuel lived. Samuel was the prophet who God used to anoint Saul as the king. But after God told Samuel, Saul's rejected me, I'm rejecting him, he tells Samuel, you go out and find this other guy, and it turns out to be David. But Samuel's scared now. And Samuel's going, if he finds out, he's going to kill me. Well, he's figured it out. And so Samuel is now hiding at a place called Nauth. I can't pronounce it right, but that's what it's called. And he's out there, and David runs to Samuel. And they tell him how to get there, and he's there. And they're all having a good time with the Lord. And can you hear that? That means I forgot to turn off my cell phone. But anyway, Saul comes out. And first he sends 3 squads of hitmen to kill David. It's right here in the Bible. And all of them are overcome by the Holy Spirit, and I don't understand what this means. They're rolling on the ground prophesying. They're speaking in tongues. I don't know what they're doing, but somehow the Spirit of the Lord interrupted them. And then Saul goes, enough already, I'll just do the job myself. He goes out, he has to chase down Samuel and David where they are, and he goes there to kill David. And I don't have theology for this, but the Spirit of the Lord came upon Saul. And the next thing you read in the Bible is Saul is naked, rolling around on the ground and prophesying. And what's the upshot of all that? Is this: David stayed humble. David never grasped for power. We're going to read more of this in the coming weeks, where David could have killed Saul and he wouldn't do it because he trusted the Lord. And when you stay in that place of humility and you stay in that place of being close to the Lord, it doesn't matter. It's not going to hurt you. God's going to protect you. And the Spirit of the Lord overcomes Saul, overwhelms Saul, the way that God overwhelms despots. I was in church last Sunday, and I'm going to end with this. I was in York, England. And I've always wondered, because I read this word in books from time to time, what is evensong? And I found out what evensong is. It's Sunday night church. And so I went to this cathedral in York, and it's like built 8 centuries ago. And it's an ornate, gorgeous building. And I go in, and I'm a tourist, and I go in, and there's a thing a little section of seats that says reserved for local residents. Now this room's like twice the size of the room we're in right now. So there's room for like 50 people that are local. There's maybe 800 of us that are there. They're mostly tourists. And then this choir comes in, and they kind of sit on 2 sides facing each other and everything, and they sing in English because we got the thing in front of us. But it's just so operatic that I can't understand anything that they're singing. My wife somehow could, and they want you to sing along with them. She could sing along, and I'm just going, what? And then they get up, and they you know, it's the Church of England, right? And they do things that are kind of like the Catholic Church. And every time somebody gets up to read from the Bible, another guy gets up and bows to them first, and they read from the Bible. And they don't say anything about what they read. They just read scriptures. Like, if I just read this scripture this morning to you and didn't say anything, it just wouldn't mean much of anything. And so I'm watching these tourists, because we're also sitting on different sides, and I'm looking at these people, and they're just nodding off. And there was this one girl, and you could tell she was like, what's going on here? And you know, her mom looked Japanese, and she looked Hapa, and so it's like she's probably culturally, you know, trying to figure out what the heck. And she's like that the whole darn time. And then they get a guy up to preach. And suddenly what was just, to me, fufa and liturgy and trivia turns into something real. And the guy tells a story, and I'm just going to be real brief with this, about Peter. If you remember in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, that King Herod had killed James, the apostle, and it had favor with the religious authorities because they hated this new thing called Christianity. And so he thought, that is a good thing. These guys like me. And he goes out and arrests Peter, and he's going to kill Peter the next day. And the Christian people are hiding out, holding a prayer meeting, praying, God, spare Peter. And an angel comes, and suddenly Peter's chains fall off his wrists. The door of the jail opens. The guards fall asleep, and Peter gets the heck out of there. And as he gets out, at some point he goes, I'm awake. This isn't a dream. It actually says that in the Bible. And so he thinks it's a dream, but then he realizes, no, it's real. And he goes to this house where they're holding this prayer meeting, and this little girl named Rhoda, they got these little things in their doors so that they can open up and see who's out there without opening the door. She opens the thing, and it's Peter, who they've been praying for. And she's so excited, she forgets to open the door, and she runs in the house, and she tells everybody, Peter's out there. And they go, no, it can't be, it's his ghost. In other words, God couldn't have answered our prayers. And finally, she convinces them, and they go and they let Peter in. He tells them the whole story, and everything happens. At this point, Peter is the hot dog of the church. He's the main man. The next thing that you read about Peter in the book of Acts is in Acts chapter 15. Saul of Tarsus, different Saul than we've been reading about, who's been killing Christians, gets knocked on his butt off a horse and sees a vision of Jesus and becomes a Christian. He goes out with a guy named Barnabas, and they start telling people about Jesus, and they tell non-Jews, because Christianity started out as a Jewish sect. He started telling non-Jews that you can come to the Lord and he'll love you and he'll forgive you just the way you are. And so these people are buying it, but Paul's also teaching you don't have to do all the Jewish rituals, and especially the one called circumcision. And that's good. Think about what I just said. You don't have to do circumcision if you weren't circumcised. That is good. Because if you had to do it, it ain't good. And so now the folks back in Jerusalem are all in an uproar. This guy's preaching that you don't have to be circumcised. And then you hear from Peter. And he comes along, the man with the power, and he supports Paul. And the whole rest of the book of Acts is about Paul and what he's doing. And every time you read about Peter, he's supporting Paul. He understood power. He understood this is when it's mine, and this is when it's time to get out of the way and serve and be whatever God's calling me to be at the moment. In this moment, you got power. In this moment, you don't have power. But the whole time, you're there to serve with power. You're not there to grasp power. That has something to do with the way we operate our church. It has something to do with the way that we go, well, Pastor C, that's not what Ralph would do. Well, it probably actually is what Ralph would do, but whether it is or not doesn't matter. And you don't get all hoo-hoo about stupid things. And you go, I get it. He gets it. I get it. That we do what we can do so we can do what God wants done. And then I wrote a book once called The Church on Monday, because that's what you are, is the church on Monday. That's what you're going to be tomorrow morning, is the church on Monday. And then you're going to be the church on Tuesday. And you're going to be the church on Wednesday. Church isn't a Sunday sport. We are the church. We don't go to church. What are you going to do with the power that God gave you? How are you going to handle it? Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for your love and your kindness. We thank you for the grace that has been extolled to people like us who just don't deserve your love, but we get it. We don't deserve your blessing, but we have them. We don't deserve the friendships that we have around here, because when people knew what we're like inside, they probably wouldn't even like us, and yet they love us because of Jesus. We thank you for all of that. And we pray, Lord, you said all power in heaven and earth was yours, and yet you went to a cross and died for us. You said that who is the greatest among us would be the servant of all. Lord, help us to be that kind of people. Lord, we're not against power. We're all for power. We want power. We want spiritual power. We want political power. We want authority to do our jobs. We want that power because it's good. But we want to be the good people who know how to use that power, and that we know how to let go of it when we need to let go of it, and we certainly know how to serve you and serve others with it while it's in our hands. Lord, I pray, as the pastor of this congregation who cares about the future of this congregation, I pray that people will look back one day and go, wow, the year 2017, the year 2018 was a watershed. That church got humming. Lord, let that be. But we know it can only be if we understand this thing called power and how to use it and how not to abuse it. Lord, help us to be the right people.